Voting in Texas, the current rules, and the 2021 voting law controversy. First, a little bit about voters in Texas. First, the term voting age population refers to the whole population of people 18 or older. The registered population are those eligible adults who are registered to vote. In 2016, the Census Bureau said there were 245.5 million people in America 18 years or older. Of those, 157.6 million people were registered to vote, and 137.5 million people actually did vote. About 10% of the U.S. voting age population consists of legal and illegal immigrants ineligible to vote. There are about 29 million people in Texas. About 27% of the population is under 18. About 73% is 18 or older. In November 2021, Texas had a voting age population of 21,866,700 and almost 17 million registered voters, 16,968,756 to be exact. So about 78% of Texas's voting age population was registered to vote. And about 4.7 million legal and illegal immigrants are in Texas, meaning a significant portion of that voting age population was legally ineligible to register. Voting is the most common form of political participation. Article 1, Section 4 of the United States Constitution allows states to set the time, place, and manner of elections. You are eligible to vote in Texas if you are a United States citizen, if you are a resident of the county where you submit the application, if you are at least 17 years and 10 months old, and you are 18 years of age on election day. If you are not a convicted felon, you may be eligible to vote if you have completed your sentence, probation, and parole. And you have not been declared by a court exercising probate jurisdiction to be either totally mentally incapacitated or partially mentally incapacitated without the right to vote. Are you already registered? You can confirm your voter registration status using the Am I Registered feature at the Texas Secretary of State website. If you moved from one place to another in the same county, you can change your information online at the Secretary of State's voter registration name and address change website. Ways to register. To register to vote in Texas, simply complete a voter registration application and return it to your county election office at least 30 days before the upcoming election date. To complete an application, you may complete an application using the Secretary of State online voter registration application. Simply fill in the required information, print, sign, and mail directly to your county election office. Or you can request a printed application. The Texas Secretary of State office will mail a voter registration application to the address provided. Or you can contact or visit your local voter registrar to complete the voter registration process. You can register in person at your county voter registrar's office. And most Texas counties, the tax assessor collector is also the voter registrar. In some counties, the county clerk or elections administrator registers voters. You can register by mail by obtaining an application from your county voter registrar's office, or pick up applications at libraries, government offices, such as post office or Department of Motor Vehicles, or high schools. Once registered to vote, people stay registered as long as they do not change addresses. Requiring an annual registration was declared unconstitutional in 1971. As you can see here, you can get registration cards or registration applications in more languages than just English. You can get them in Spanish, and in some places Vietnamese, Chinese, or other languages. Once registered, you can, if you wish, apply for a ballot by mail. In other words, a mail-in ballot. To be eligible to vote early by mail in Texas, you must be 65 years or older, or sick or disabled, or be out of the county on election day and during the period for early voting by personal appearance, or be confined in jail but otherwise eligible to vote. You must address and mail the completed application for a ballot by mail to the early voting clerk in your county. The early voting clerk is the county clerk or elections administrator for your county. Early voting in Texas normally begins 17 days before Election Day. Early voting in Texas ends 4 days before Election Day. Voters can request an absentee ballot if they are sick, disabled, over the age of 65, or out of town on Election Day. The Texas Secretary of State oversees elections in Texas. In 1892, Texas adopted the Australian ballot. The Australian ballot, also called secret ballot, is a system of voting in which voters mark their choices in privacy on uniform ballots printed and distributed by the government, or designate their choices by some other secret means. Ballots are always printed at public expense, and voters cast their ballots in secret. Ballots are distributed to every eligible voter at the polls. The Voting Rights Act requires counties with an ethnic minority that comprises 5% or more of the county's voting age residents, or 10,000 people overall, to print ballots in their native language. When a voter arrives at a polling location, the voter will be asked to present one of 7 acceptable forms of photo ID that is current, or, for voters aged 18 to 69, expired no more than 4 years. Voters aged 70 or older may present one of the 7 acceptable forms of photo ID that has expired for any length of time that is otherwise valid. If a voter does not possess one of the 7 acceptable forms of photo ID and cannot reasonably obtain one, the voter may present a supporting form of ID and execute a reasonable impediment declaration, noting the voter's reasonable impediment to obtaining an acceptable form of photo identification, stating that the information contained in the declaration is true, that the voter is the same individual personally appearing at the polling place to sign the declaration, and that the voter faces a reasonable impediment to procuring an acceptable form of photo identification. Election officials are still required by state law to determine whether the voter's name on the identification provided, acceptable photo ID or supporting form of ID if applicable, matches the name on the official list of registered voters. After a voter presents their ID, whether it's an acceptable form of photo ID or a supporting form of photo ID if applicable, the election worker will compare it to the official list of registered voters. If the name on the ID matches the name on the list of registered voters, the voter will follow the regular procedures for voting. If the name does not match exactly, but is substantially similar to the name on the OLRV, that is, official list of registered voters, the voter will be permitted to vote as long as the voter signs an affidavit stating that the voter is the same person on the list of registered voters. Approved forms of photo identification to cast a ballot in Texas are a Texas driver's license, a Texas election identification certificate, a Texas personal identification card, a Texas handgun license, a United States military identification card containing a photograph, a United States citizenship certificate containing a photograph, or a United States passport, either the passport book or the card. If a voter does not possess acceptable photo identification, the voter may still cast a ballot by executing a reasonable impediment declaration and presenting a supporting form of identification. Here is a list of the supporting forms of ID that can be presented if the voter does not possess one of the forms of acceptable photo ID and cannot reasonably obtain one. A copy or original of a government document that shows the voter's name and an address, including the voter's voter registration certificate. A copy of or original current utility bill. A copy of or original bank statement. A copy of or original government check. A copy of or original paycheck. Or a copy of or original of a certified domestic from a U.S. state or territory birth certificate, or a document confirming birth admissible in a court of law which establishes the voter's identity, which may include a foreign birth document. After presenting one of the forms of supporting ID listed above, the voter must execute a reasonable impediment declaration. Traditionally, Texas has had low voter turnout. Some possible explanations for this include frequent elections leading to lower voter turnout, Texas ballots being lengthy and confusing, or the fact that many Texans today identify as independents, and a decline in party identification is linked to lower turnout. The biggest voter turnout in Texas is for presidential elections. The lowest voter turnout in Texas is for local political offices such as mayor. 18 to 20-year-olds are the age group with the lowest voter turnout. Hispanics are the ethnic group with the lowest voter turnout. This may be because, on average, they are the youngest ethnic group in Texas, and many are also ineligible to vote because they are not citizens. Voter turnout increases with age. 18 to 24-year-olds had a 27.3% turnout in the 2016 general election, but 65-year-olds and older had a 65% turnout in the same election, over twice as high. Democrats were so opposed to these bills, which they didn't have enough people in the legislature to stop, that they walked out twice, once in May and again in July. They fled from two 30-day special sessions called by Governor Abbott to pass voting and election reforms. Under the Texas Constitution, the legislature requires a quorum of 2/3 of lawmakers to be present to conduct state business in either chamber. Absent lawmakers can be legally compelled to return to the Capitol. If they were in the state, the legislative body could request their presence. Democrats said they expected state Republicans to ask the Department of Public Safety to track them down, The state police and Texas Rangers would then have the power to arrest them and return them to the Capitol grounds. Governor Greg Abbott said, Texas Democrats' decision to break a quorum of the Texas legislature and abandon the Texas state capitol inflicts harm on the very Texans who elected them to serve. Once they step back into the state, they will be arrested and brought back to the Capitol, and we will be conducting business. Democrats have done this before. They fled twice in 2003, once to Ardmore, Oklahoma, to block Republicans from redrawing congressional districts, and then again to New Mexico for the same reason. In 1979, 12 Democratic senators hid from Republicans and Texas Rangers for 5 days to prevent a quorum because they objected to a bill that would create 2 separate primaries for the presidential race and for other races. Despite Democratic opposition, Senate Bill 1 passed in the House on August 31, 2021, with 80 in favor, 41 opposed, and 1 merely voting present. It passed in the Senate with 18 yeas and 13 nays, and it was signed by Governor Abbott on September 7, 2021. As he signed it, Abbott said one thing that all Texans can agree on, and that is that we must have trust and confidence in our elections. The bill that I'm about to sign helps to achieve that goal. The law does, however, make it harder for fraudulent votes to be cast. The bill outlawed drive-through voting, which several counties used in 2020 to allow voters to cast ballots from their car. Harris County's use of 10 drive-through polling places for the November general election came under Republican scrutiny. The county's drive-through polling places were mostly set up under large tents. Voters remained in their cars and showed a photo ID and verified their registration before filling out their ballots on portable voting machines. The option proved popular, with 1 in 10 in-person early voters in the county casting their ballots at drive-through locations. According to the law, it is now a state jail felony for local election officials to send unsolicited applications to request a mail-in ballot. Political parties would still be able to send out unsolicited applications at their own expense. The proposal is a direct response to Harris County's attempt to proactively send applications to all 2.4 million registered voters last year with specific instructions on how to determine if they were eligible. The Texas Supreme Court ultimately blocked that effort, but other Texas counties sent applications to voters 65 and older without much scrutiny. Though those voters automatically qualify to vote by mail, mailing unrequested applications to them in the future would also be a crime. The law creates a new correction process for mail-in voting. Building on Democratic proposals, this new process allows voters to correct their mail-in ballots if they are at risk of being rejected for a technical error. Voters could make those corrections online through a new online ballot tracker that was previously approved by the legislature. The legislation will also allow voters who make errors on the mail-in ballot application itself to make corrections. Senate Bill 1 sets up new monthly reviews of the state's voter rolls to identify non-citizens. It requires the Texas Secretary of State's office to compare the statewide voter registration list with data from the Department of Public Safety to pinpoint individuals who told the department they were not citizens while obtaining or renewing their driver's license or ID card after registering to vote.